Hello. Welcome to another Chit Chats with Git Cats. Today's been a good day. I just had one with Steve Stevens and that went really well. Steve is an absolute ease of a gentleman to talk to. It was so easy. And speaking of easy gentlemen to talk to, I've got another brilliant one here today. I have Mr. Louie Shelton. Everybody welcome Louie.
Good morning.
How are you, Louie?
Oh, I'm pretty good.
That's good, mate. It's pretty early for muso time, isn't it?
It is. I had a late one last night, as usual. You know,
Yeah.
I'm still on musicians' time.
Yeah.
So we were in here, you know, banging away till about midnight.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I just went and grabbed a coffee from downstairs in between and asked them what time they open so that I know next time if I do a 7 a.m. that they've got coffee and I can get nice
good.
and caffeinated. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Now, Louie, we've actually done a bit of an interview about a year or so ago, and it was the first time I'd ever tried to sit down and talk to somebody. And I must thank you for actually putting up with me saying a lot. I'm still working on that one. But I think we covered a lot of your early history of being little Junior Shelton all the way up to becoming a session guitar player.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kick off, folks, if you do want to get some of Louie's earlier history, have a look on my channel. Louie and the 52 Telecaster is the video you're looking for. We covered a lot of things there. So, Louie, I'm going to kick off today, mate, with your very first guitar session. That was Last Train to Clarksville the very first one that you did? Or was that the first known one?
Oh, I mean, I had been in the studio, obviously. The guys that produced and wrote Last Train to Clarksville and a lot of the Monkee hits, I had been in the studio with them for probably at least a year as they were doing demos, because they were writers from Screen Gems. So it wasn't my first time recording or anything like that. I think I had done some Smothers Brothers sessions. Had done some albums with Joe and Eddie. And I'd already worked with some of the great musicians. The very first session I did in L.A. with Joe and Eddie had Ray Brown on bass and Earl Palmer on drums. And those are two absolute legends. Uh-huh. But Last Train to Clarksville was the first hit that I played on. And at that point, I wasn't one of the session players. I was just, you know, doing casual things. But once I played on Clarksville, the producers sort of got my name, and that's the way you really get into the session scene, is you get the producers calling you. And I had Richard Perry started using me. Richard was a very busy producer. I mean, all the records he's produced. I did this Barbra Streisand album with him, Ella Fitzgerald. I did a Ringo album with him, and he's just produced so many different artists. But that was one of my steady gigs that I got as a session player. And then Motown moved out to L.A., and all of a sudden, because I had played the stuff on Last Train to Clarksville, Berry Gordy said, you know, we just signed this little group called the Jackson 5 and, you know, come over and play some hit licks on that stuff. So that became another regular gig. And so that's the way it kind of worked. The trick to getting into the session scene in those days was getting the producers to call you.
Cool.
Because they were the ones that were calling the musicians.
Yeah.
And then Hal Blaine and those guys kind of embraced me and accepted me into that clique of regular session players, and so I had several good years of just doing session work before I transitioned into producing. Cool. And did the stuff with Seals and Crofts and some other people.
Okay, so do you remember what age you were when you first did the Last Train to Clarksville session?
I think I was about 26 to 27.
Yeah.
Yeah. Up until that time, it had been all these years of playing in clubs and Las Vegas and that kind of stuff, just a casual club musician.
Yeah.
Which that's where you build your chops, it wasn't wasted time.
Yeah.
Didn't make any money, but it really helped my playing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
what made you move? Firstly, I should ask the question: where was the last Train to Clarksville session recorded? Was that in LA?
Oh yeah, that was in LA.
Yeah.
I believe that was at RCA's big studio.
Okay.
And I'll never forget. That was my first time in a real big studio. And Dave Hassinger was the engineer. Dave had done some of the Rolling Stones sessions, and he ended up doing my Seals and Crofts stuff. He was the engineer for the first, Summer Breeze and Diamond Girl albums.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. So when you moved to LA, you were friends with Glenn Campbell back in Arkansas, weren't you?
Albuquerque. Yeah. We're both from Arkansas, but I didn't meet Glenn till I went out to New Mexico, and Glenn had moved to Albuquerque and was working with his uncle's band, and I moved out there on a gig, and that's where I met Glenn, and we became friends, good friends, and doing jam sessions and playing together a lot. So when I went to LA, Glenn was the only person I knew out there.
Yeah.
He went out 2 years before I did. And
okay.
Of course, he got his position as a session player right away. People just loved him. They loved his personality and his playing and everything. Great singer too, So I guess because he had that number one slot filled for quite a while, and then it was about the time that he became a superstar with his hit records that then I kind of worked my way into the session scene.
Okay.
And it was that was kind of the timing of that.
Yeah. So you played on some of his records as well?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Well, I did his TV show for 2 years, so whenever he had a session, I did his sessions as well.
Great.
Yeah.
One thing I've never asked you is whether you played on Wichita Linesman. Did you play on that at all?
No, I didn't play on that one. He played on that.
Okay.
He played on that.
He did it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with him doing the live show, I guess you were playing his parts while he was being more the front of it all, I guess, huh?
He had a full orchestra. He had the whole strings. Marty Page was conductor. He had the whole horn section, brass section, rhythm section, and strings. And I was in that group. Sometimes he would have me come up and play on the show with him. But he also up there, because we were on one floor and he was on another floor over at CBS. And so he had his regular band that was with him on stage most of the time up there. But once in a while, he would call me up there just to join him.
Okay.
And we hang out a lot, because he had the best guests in the world, and Jerry Reed was almost a regular. And me and Glenn and Jerry would get together and, trade licks and stuff. That was always fun. Wow. Go out to dinner. It was a little bit of a party atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Glenn was great to work with.
Cool. Now, you mentioned Hal Blaine really sort of took you under the wing and gave you a bit of guidance and introduced you into that clique.
Yeah.
What kind of things did you learn from him that carried on?
Well, his phrase was "the drummer's God," and and this is a good point, because I've noticed that a lot of young musicians, maybe this thought never crossed their mind, and it probably didn't cross my mind. But if everyone's just out there sort of playing on their own, things can get a little bit messy. But in a recording session, if you've got a perfect drummer, he's the one that everybody locks into. Mm. You're not locking into the bass or the piano. Everybody's locking in to the drummer. And he very clearly pointed that out to me because, like most guitar players, I was playing a little bit ahead of the beat. You know, we're ready to go, and we're always firing and stuff. And he very nicely said, you know, I really like your playing, and you're going to do great in this town, but you're playing just a little ahead of the beat, and it makes it sound like I'm dragging. So just,
Okay.
you know, and that was a very important lesson. And from then on, I guess I became what they call a pocket player. That's what David Paich calls me, a pocket player.
Cool.
So everybody's in the pocket together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And
It only takes one guy to make a master recording sound like a demo.
absolutely, particularly if it's the drummer. I always say you're only as good as your drummer. If your drummer's no good, the band's not going to sound good.
That's right.
Mate, I know over the years, and forgive me if I get a bit techie, people, because this is a guitar nerd channel, so we might get into a bit of the technical side of things, but that's why we're here. Mate, you used the same amp pretty much throughout your career, haven't you? Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yes. When I did the Monkees session, I was playing through a super reverb Fender because that's what I had played in the clubs and in Vegas with. So, and that was my only amp. But once I got into this session thing, and this was before we had cartage services taking our equipment from one studio to the next, I was lugging that big amp around. It didn't take me long to find out, you know, there's some smaller amps I could be using.
Yeah.
And also, because most of our recording was live with other musicians and open mics in the room, we couldn't really blast a big amp. So all we needed was like a little Princeton, you know, or something that size. So I got the Princeton right away, and I used it through my whole session career. I never used any other amp, and I've still got it, you know, and it's still my favorite amp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually took a selfie with myself with your amp when I was there
right.
a couple of months ago. I saw it and I was like, do you mind it? Yep. Because that's a great little piece of history, that.
Oh, yeah. It's played on a lot of hit records, that's for sure.
My phone's going off here. Why are you ringing me? If I'm having any troubles with audio or anything, people, you let me know in the chat there. I'm hoping that's not what that call's all about. Louie, you've been through many changes in technology over the years, starting with tape and the little amps, and now we're looking around, we can see your studio behind you there. Was that very hard to grasp as things changed, or has it just been little things that changed along the way and you've just picked those up as you went?
Well, I mean, I go way back to mono, and I remember I was in the 8th grade when they discovered stereo, and they brought it to my school, to the auditorium, and they had a speaker on each side of the stage to demonstrate this great breakthrough. But the only thing they had was the sound of a train that went from one speaker to the other.
Uh-huh.
And so I was there when stereo came in, then 4-track. Then when I went to LA, most of the stuff was still on 8-track. As a matter of fact, we cut the Summer Breeze album. He still had an 8-track board at the Sound Factory, but he had gotten a 16-track machine. And then for our next album, he had gotten a 24-track machine. And then I was there when everything went from analog to digital and endless amounts of tracks now. And we had me and Seals and Crofts had a really big studio in LA called Dawnbreaker. That's where Jay Graydon did a lot of his recording. He did the Al Jarreau stuff there, a lot of it, and some of the Manhattan Transfer. And a lot of this gear came out of that studio. It's a lot of old analog gear. And I still use some of the limiters and compressors and reverbs there. But I also use a lot of stuff in the computer, these days.
Yeah.
So much easier to work with. I don't have to align a tape machine every day when I come in now.
Sure.
You know?
I I do
I was
recall
gonna
you telling
say,
me. Sorry, you go, mate.
I was just going to say, when I listen to those old records, though, man, they just sound unbelievable. The separation is so nice, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't deal with the analog stuff anymore, personally, you know.
Yeah.
And the price of tape is unbelievable these days.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We were just talking to Steve Stevens earlier about recording an analog back then, and him saying to Billy, "I think I've got a better solo in me," and he's like, "No, man, that was good enough. We can't. We don't have enough tracks. Every time you tried a new one, you had to go over your old one. So
Yeah.
you had to be pretty confident that you had another one."
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, doing vocals and having to punch in a line here and try to maybe just punch in one word. I mean, it was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now you've got endless tracks, and then you can just pick the best of them and put you a master tape together. Yeah. I used to try to save 8 tracks for vocals if I could, and then make a master vocal track out of those 8 tracks.
Oh, cool.
Put together a master vocal track out of that.
Yeah. Is there any disasters that you can think of along the way where you thought you had everything, all the parts you needed, and then boom, something happened?
Oh, there's been a few of those. Like with analog, I remember I was recording England Dan and John Ford Coley over at A&M Records, and we had gone in. I think we were going to do an organ overdub, and so the engineer said, well, "Okay, well, here's some tracks we don't need. I'll erase those." And we had 3 songs on that reel. And he puts it in record and goes out and sets up the microphones. And it not only erased the tracks that we didn't need on the one song, but it also took out a few tracks on the next 2 songs that were like master recording stuff. Another time, well, this was a real disaster. I was recording Seals and Crofts, and we had this was before we had our big studio. We were in a small garage studio, and there was about 3 feet from the back wall to the recording desk, and then we had the 24 track here. And that was back when we were using David Page and Jeff Vaccaro and David Hungate. And we had this track that had been very difficult to get, and Jimmy Seals was out there overdubbing this acoustic guitar, and David said, "Can I run the machine?" And I said, "Okay, sure." So we finished a take, and David hits some button, and the reels start going in opposite directions of each other. First it spun off some tape, then it started going in free speed, and when it cut all the slack out, it snapped the tape. The 2-inch tape went down to like nothing, and then it snapped. And luckily, we were able to find another spot on the tape that had a similar section, so we went and made a copy of that and then pieced it together. But no, there was always those things going on, you know. Yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that was the story that I was thinking of, and I wasn't too sure who it was, and I brought that up with Steve Stevens a little earlier. But yeah, do you think, and do you miss the sound of analog tape?
I prefer it. Yeah, I mean, if it was an ideal situation, I prefer it.
Yeah,
I really do. I mean, I hear the difference. I hear the difference in my first solo album and, you know, the others, but I don't think the average person hears the difference, and you know, and I wouldn't prefer to go back to it, because there's so much more you can do, edit wise and all. Absolutely. And all your effects and all of that. So
yeah.
You know, I went to visit Jay Graydon, and Jay has an incredible studio. And he has rows and rows of the most incredible outboard gear. And so he had just, and he's got two 24-track machines in each corner, and a big console across the room. And this was back when ADATs had just come out, and he had 8 ADATs in his wall. And he walks in, he says, "Yeah, I'm using these." And I said, "Oh, wow." I said, "And then, so that then you run it through the Pultex and the LA2." "Oh, hell no, I'm not going to put that noise back in there, man. You just get over it, you know."
Yeah.
But that's Jay Graydon.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I think the masters actually just run with it. They're not too concerned, are they, about all those things? I think we talked about it the other night where you were looking at a computer upgrade and your converters probably wouldn't work with the new computer. And we said it's come to a point now where even the cheapest gear out there is as good as it was in those early days of digital.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, my little laptop now is stronger than my big, the big computer I'm using. I could, people are making records on these laptops now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which I probably will be very shortly.
Yeah. We'll get you going with that, mate. I need one myself. It's all those little things that you don't want to be stuck in that room. It would be nice to go and sit in front of the TV and do all your edits and things, huh?
Yes, tune your vocals. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Has there been any other big, huge hikes in technology that you think have been an absolute godsend to you in the studio that spring to mind? Not
really. I'm a bit old-fashioned. I mean, I'm to a point now where when I come in to do a vocal, I've already got my mic set. I know exactly what limiter, compressor. I do very little. It just pretty much goes straight to the machine. Mm-hmm. And it's good. It's a comfortable position to like with my guitar. I used to come in and I would try 20 different mics trying to pick which one sounded best. Now it's all set. I can walk in here and I'm ready to go just as soon as I turn stuff on. But no, I'm not, other than just having the ease of, working in the digital domain. I don't mess with other stuff anymore. I like half the stuff in the rack there I never use. Just a couple of the compressors and the reverbs. The other stuff it's sitting there as a museum pretty much.
Yeah. Looks good in the background, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mate, I have noticed that you're not scared of using software for guitar parts as well. Are you noticing that much of a tone difference between using AmpliTube or something like that, or as opposed to miking up real amps?
Well, I'm just getting set up with AmpliTube, and I've got a room full of all of these other, digital mod things, and every once in a while I'll use one, but I've got the little amp sitting there, and there's just something about it that there's a connection there for me, hearing that amp and it talking to the guitar, that I end up most of the time using the amp, because the mods, all they are they've tried to copy the sound of the amp, and if you've got the amp sitting there, why do you need the mod? Mm-hmm. I've got Mesa Boogies and Vox and Fender Bassman and Blues Junior, Deluxe. I've got all those, so having all that to play with. It's more of a fun thing where I'll come in. A lot of the probably experimenting is with the effects in those systems.
Yeah.
But then I've got a rack full of pedals that I rarely use, but every once in a while you need a special sound for something.
Yep.
But most of my delays and reverbs I just use in the computer there, and just a straight guitar through the mic from the amp, and then affect it over there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now you said that you were the in-house guitar player at Motown when Motown moved to LA, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So was that just like an everyday gig for you? You'd walk in and, hey, there's this song. Did you actually know who the artist was a lot of the time, or would they just roll the tape and go, play on this?
Yeah, most of the time we did. And if not, I'd ask, because it kind of helped to know who it was for.
Yep.
But the Motown sessions were usually 10 to 1. And they were, I don't know, maybe sometimes 2 or 3 days a week for Motown. The very first one was the Jackson 5.
Cool.
And I did their first 2 albums. And of course, in between, we were doing Smokey Robinson and all these other Motown artists. But that was a real fun gig to me because, well, for one thing, it was always a great band, and also because of the history of Motown and being privileged to having been asked to play on those records. It was, for me, it was a bit of a highlight,
Yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. So what made you venture over into production? Was that something that you wanted to do, or did that just people came to you because they liked the parts that you were doing? And what was that transition?
Well, I think from the very beginning in the studio, I was interested in the recording desk, and I used to bother when engineers, and I worked with some of the greatest engineers, Roy Halley, that did all the Simon and Garfunkel stuff. I actually was able to use him on some of my albums. Henry Louie, that did all the Joni Mitchell stuff and a lot of hit records. But they taught me a lot. And these engineers in LA at the time, they had to be very fast, because you had a 10 a.m. session, then you had a turnover where the two to 5 sessions coming in, it's a whole different group of musicians. They've taken out that drum kit, they brought in another, and all the keyboards. And this engineer, before the guy counts the first tune off, he's got to have a sound on the whole band again.
Yeah, right.
So these engineers, they're able to give me a little kick drum, tap, 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 tap. They know exactly where to dial and pull out the cardboard, and, with each drum. And I mean, it's just that quick.
Yep.
And they were nice enough to tell me some of those secrets. And but I think my interest in engineering was one thing, and then the other was I worked with certain producers who I didn't feel communicated with the musicians really well. And I thought, well, I could do this, I could, I think a lot of us musicians that were doing sessions, Leon Russell was one of the first that made that transition. And I'm sure that a lot of other session players, well, of course they have David Paich and people like that. They became producers as well. But it was just this desire to have control and be able to contribute to the whole thing rather than just sit there and play guitar. And my background was so thorough as far as having played in the clubs for so many years and analyzing records and, appreciating, really being interested in making a record. Mm-hmm. It's just the overall thing about making a record was what appealed to me to become a producer.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything that really stands out, like the first time you heard the tape roll? Is there many that you went, man, that is a hit straight up before you even started? Or was there any unexpected ones that you didn't think would be a hit that made it very big?
I know one that I knew was going to be a hit was the Boz Scaggs. I mean, that just jumped out at you. Man, this is, And it still does that today. It sounds as good today.
Yeah.
When you hear Lowdown, it sounds as good today as it did the day we recorded it.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most fun sessions because it was with that great group, Jeff Vaccaro, David Paich, and David Hungate, and Boz standing there giving you a great guide vocal. But speaking of guide vocals, going way back to the Carpenters, she would give us a guide vocal. Karen would be over behind a curtain in the room with a microphone singing Close to You or whatever it was. And it was just absolutely perfect. It could have gone on the record as being the master vocal.
Yeah.
She was just that good.
Wow.
But it was nothing to her. She just, it just was so natural.
Yep.
Yeah.
And a great drummer.
Yes.
I was very surprised when I saw her on TV doing some big drum solo thing. It was like, wow, okay, very cool. Very cool.
Well, one of my early days in LA before my session career, Glenn had introduced me we went over to a Ricky Nelson session, and Joe Osborne was the bass player. Me and Joe became friends. We later worked on a lot of records together. But before either one of us were real session players, he was friends of Richard and Karen's when they were teenagers. And we went over to their garage studio and made some demos. Karen played drums, Joe played bass. Of course, Richard keyboard, me on guitar. And I don't hesitate to say that probably got them their record deal with A&M.
Wow.
Yeah, because It was shortly after that they had their record deal.
Okay. Mate, I'm just keeping an eye on the chat there, and there's a few questions. Feel free to ask questions, people. That's why we're here, so that we can keep the conversation flowing. We want to answer your questions. I'm going to run through it backwards a little bit. There's one here from Blair Helsing, which says, Louie, how did you meet Jerry McGee? Was it through Boyce and Hart? You burned up the grooves together on that first Monkees album.
Yeah. Jerry was in Bobby Hart's band, and it was pretty much that band plus me that played on the Monkees sessions. And that's when I believe that's when I first met Jerry. I may have seen him play out at the Palomino with some of the country bands or something, but that's where we got together, was on the Monkees sessions.
Cool. And there's another question here from John Mason. He's saying, big thanks to Louie for taking the time for the chat. And he'd love to hear recollections about playing on John Lennon's Be My Baby and rock and roll sessions in the 70s.
Okay. Well, that was a circus because what's his name? The crazy producer. Phil Spector was producing, and so we had a room full of musicians and no charts. They had horn players. It was me, Hal Blaine, Dr. John, and I forget who all was in there. But Phil Spector was already in his crazy mode. I think he was in that mode the whole time I knew him. And but that was the first time I met John Lennon, who was really nice, and it was such a. I felt like when I got a call to do that session that I'd finally made it to the top.
Cool.
Doing one of the Beatles sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah, John was really nice when I met him, and he had a bottle of whiskey or something on a swivel by his chair that he could just tilt it over. So by the end of the night, he was feeling pretty good. But it was just a fantastic, the sessions for those things were just, for me, it was a thrill just to be in the presence of one of the Beatles, and especially John.
Yeah.
Because I was, I had all their records, and I loved the stuff. At first, I wasn't crazy about them because remember their first records were so bubblegum kind of,
Sure.
And I actually had tickets to go see them at the Hollywood Bowl, and I gave them to someone else.
Oh,
But
really?
later on, as their records started improving, it was just you just look forward to the next one. Man, they were just the way they were just skyrocketing with all of this new kind of writing and production. It was unbelievable, and that they did it all on a 4-track, just unbelievable.
Yeah.
No.
I think the key there is that these guys, they hear a sound in their head, don't they? They know what they're trying to shoot for, and you would try and manipulate the technology available at the time to achieve that.
Well, first of all, they were great writers, and then they were great pioneers in arranging and of course they had their arranger there. I forget his name, but that's because I'm old. He was helpful with a lot of those arrangements too, and those great horn things. But they were just very creative, and if you look at the songs that Paul McCartney has written, it's just unbelievable how anyone can write that many great songs. Sting's the same way. Their catalogs, man, the songs they've written, Phil Collins, Billy Joel,
Yep.
These guys, you go see their show for a 2-hour show, and every song would have been a #1 hit. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Speaking of hitmakers, mate, I know you've done some work with Quincy Jones as well over the years, right?
Not a lot of work with Quincy, just a few sessions. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I love Quincy.
Yeah.
Very nice guy.
Yeah. Am I right in recalling that you said it was on film type sessions with Quincy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
More than likely. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mate, I've also heard you tell great stories over the years to me too about I'm trying to think who the artist was, where you guys just winged it and played something one take, Tbone Walker or something, and it made it onto a record, and it was just a off the cuff improvisation.
Well, that was that's a funny story. We were doing a Tbone Walker album, and we had several days of sessions. We get to the last day of recording, and the producer said, "We've got 15 minutes left. Does anyone have a song?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Blues in B flat." And we just played this blues in B flat. He said, "What do you call it?" I said, "Blues for BB." And we recorded it, and it went on the album.
Cool.
On the Tbone Walker album.
Yeah?
Yeah. I've got it up there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Any other happy accidents that came along the way that you can think of that became signature things but weren't really planned at the time, that just came off the cuff? Anything spring to mind for that?
Not at the moment that I can think of.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It's still early for me, man. The cobwebs are still there,
Yeah. I'm
sure there were plenty of them.
Yeah. Well, people are asking you some questions. They might recall some things. I'm just going to work my way back through here as well. What is your favorite guitar, electric and acoustic?
Right now, I have probably a 339 and my Telly are the two that I go back and forth most of the time.
Okay.
And then next to that would be the Strats, and then I have more of a 335 size guitar that I like a lot. I have an old 51 Martin D18 that I use for pretty much all my acoustic recording. But I also have a parlor size guitar that records very well that I use for a little bit of a thinner sound, which is nice. And the rest of them, they're just taking up space. I just got guitars all over the place, but I only played 3 or 4 of them.
Some very unique combinations of things going on there. I every time I'm there, I sort of look at them, and there's, there's your Strat that's got the Greg Fryer neck on there. I think you had an Ibanez with a Valley Arts neck, and all these little throw-togethers.
I tell you, the one that I probably play most is this little electrophonic guitar that's got the speakers in it and the amplifier and the tremolo.
Yep.
I see you've got one back there in the back of the room.
Yep.
Man, those are just, and they sound great, you know. I've actually used it on some recordings as well.
Oh, really? Yeah. That's my get up in the morning, play guitar around the house. I even started using it for teaching, so that I don't need to plug into an amp. It's all there. Really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of your Telecaster, somebody, we got John R88 is saying, "Hey Louie, the last time you guys had a chat, you had mentioned your current 52 reissue has modifications to it. Can you mention what some of those are?"
Only I changed to noiseless pickups because I was playing on some big stages with a lot of lights, and the single coils were picking up a lot of noise. So I believe that's the only modification to that one. The 52 that I, traded, I had put a Bigsby on it, and then it had a cutaway at the top as well as the cutaway at the bottom, just in case anyone's seen that one floating around.
Yeah, I did do it. I made a video after we spoke, and I posted some pictures of it. So if anybody's watching this, have a look on my channel. While you're there, a like and a subscribe would go a long way and help me keeping things going. But there is a video there where I've got pictures of your old guitar, just in case somebody out there has seen it, because it is very identifiable, I think. Actually, a few people have messaged me going, "Is that the guitar that Mike Bloomfield owns?" But I don't think it is it?
I don't think so.
No.
No, I've seen that one, and it's not the one. Yeah. I'm actually building a Tele.
Yeah.
Because the pickups that I took out of this 52 reissue were really good. So I had enough pieces laying around, and so I've just ordered an older body for a Telecaster and a new neck, and I'm putting all that together because I want to put a tremolo on it. I haven't had a Tele with a tremolo.
Cool.
So I want to see how that goes.
Yeah. So someone is asking here, how did you prepare to record and contribute to such a broad list of artists' recording sessions? And then they've got a whole bunch of artists there in brackets. Did you actually have time to prepare for sessions, or was it just flying on the seat of your pants?
Oh, no, you were on the spot. You know, it was, it's like, do a solo here, that you had never had time to prepare. My preparation was building my technique through the years, and versatility was a big asset, because having grown up in Arkansas and being so interested in guitar, when I was 16, I met Reggie Young, who played on a lot of Elvis's and so many big records. Reggie was a couple of years older than me, and we were playing around Little Rock together, and he told me about guitar players like Johnny Smith and Barney Kessel. Up to that time, I'd played country, blues, and rock. Rock was new in those days, but I had the Chuck Berry stuff down.
Yep.
So anyway, I got interested in the jazz, and then I would listen to Segovia, learn some of that, listen to flamenco players, and I never was just a one music kind of guy. I liked all of it.
Yep.
And I would sit and work on it and these techniques and all that. So when I got to the studios of the session scene, on top of having the technique to do all the, and a bit of knowledge on what's blues and what's jazz, and I'd also over the years in the clubs, I had played the standards and I had played the pop and I'd played all of the stuff. And so when I got into the studio, I had enough sensibility to know, well, this is this kind of a song, so I need to play this kind of stuff on it. And it took a certain discipline to only think about what's going to contribute to the song and where it needs it. You could never go in there with an attitude of, let me show you how much I can play. As soon as you do that, they don't want you anymore.
Absolutely.
It's just, you got to come up with the right thing in the right places.
Yep.
And so the versatility of technique and having listened to stuff, because I was a fan of all kinds of music. Didn't matter whether it was Motown or whether it was Led Zeppelin or whatever. I could, discern what kind of thing we were supposed to be going for. And so that was the way that the stuff I played ended up coming out on the records.
Yeah. Yep. So, over the years, have you come across many guitar players? You just said about playing the right thing at the right time. Have you come across many guys that you thought had the goods, but just maybe their ego got in the way and they felt that they had to actually impress you with their playing and not just play the right thing at the right time? You come across many guys like that? Without naming names?
I haven't, because if they would have gone into the session scene doing that, they wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
But because from the time that I got into the studio scene, shortly after that, other young guys with versatility, like Dean Parks and Larry Carlton, Jay Graydon, Steve Lukather, Michael Thompson, all these, Tim Pierce, they can all play anything. Now, the older generation of guys came from bebop backgrounds, and they were fantastic players. They were, star jazz players, Barney Kessel, Joe Pass, Howard Roberts. They didn't embrace, the new kind of rock and roll stuff. But that's because they should have been on a stage playing for the people that love their stuff, because that's what, I remember one of the best sessions, one of the most fun sessions for me was a Peggy Lee session, and Howard Roberts and Dennis Budimir. There was the arranger had written this thing for those two guitars, and I was just playing the chords, and it was so beautifully played and read. And I'm not a reader, and but I always let people know I'm not a reader. If you need someone to read notes that somebody wrote, you got to get someone else, because I don't, I can get to a certain point, but then if you start throwing sharps and flats to me, it's, I don't want to know about it. Yeah. So most of them just said, "Oh no, just come in and play your licks, and we'll be okay."
Yeah. Yeah. So if anybody's out there that's interested in becoming a session player, from somebody who has lived a very successful career like yourself, what kind of things have you seen people can try and work on? What qualities are desirable in a player, and what tips could you hand over to somebody looking to become a session guitarist?
Well, the bar is so high. If you look at guys like Michael Thompson and Tim Pierce, they've got all the sounds, they read, they've got all the styles, So you've got to get to that level as a player, and then you've got to get the ear of some producer that needs you, like a David Foster, because there's not a lot of that kind of work going on anymore. But I'm sure LA is not the only place where sessions go on. There's all the major cities, there's recording going on. You just got to get out there. You got to get your technique and your sound and that kind of stuff together, and then you've got to somehow get to the ear of whoever's putting sessions together. But most guys, they've got their stuff on YouTube, or they're playing in the local clubs or whatever. You've got to get out and be seen and be discovered somehow. And it's usually a step-by-step thing where you get one thing and that leads to another. And but like I say, it's not like it was in the 60s where it's like all the recording was going on in LA, because now it's going on in San Francisco, it's going on in Detroit or wherever, all over, all these major cities.
It's going on in people's bedrooms now. Everyone has got a Pro Tools rig or whatever their choice of DAW is. And I don't know if that's been... I mean, that's a great thing, because you don't have to have the money for these big expensive studios. There's a lot of current stuff that's out there. There's this young girl, Billie Eilish, that the younger people are into, and her brother produced all that on a laptop at home, and apparently she's just sitting on her bed recording all that. And I think that's good and it's bad, because it means that it's accessible for everybody, but the art of engineering has probably taken a big backward step as well. Do you think that, has that affected the quality of music these days, do you think? Not, people just making it on their own, not having that guidance of a producer. I mean, you've produced a lot of big albums for people.
Well, I mean, you've got the world of hit records that they're being made in such a different way. But you take someone like Dua Lipa, that her records sound great. Most of it is probably done on a computer, as opposed to the way we used to make the records with 5 musicians in the room, cutting the track. The thing that's amazing to me is the classic hits, like the stuff I played on and the records that were being made back 50 years ago. Those kind of, I don't see that coming out of today's music, but man, the musicianship is unbelievable these days. I mean, like these great young guitar players and drummers, and you find it on YouTube. Yeah, and they're probably doing great as live performances, but as far as in the recording world, well, I guess a lot of them are doing okay with iTunes and that kind of stuff. Yeah. But it's not like you're hearing their records on the radio. Yeah. But the level of playing is just way beyond what we used to have as on a hit record. The Christ, it's just unbelievable.
What was the name of the chap that you showed me the other night that was playing? He was playing flamenco style instead of using picks, but he was just shredding
I can't remember.
I did write it down. I did write it down, and I'm hoping that he actually speaks English, because I think he was South American or something. And if he does, I'm going to get that guy on, because that was incredible, man.
Well, there's guys like him all over the world. And because they're in France and all these different countries, they have these names that I can't remember, because they're not, I have to write them down or put them in my computer.
I've got it here. His name was
phenomenal.
Matteo Mancuso.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Mind-blowing. I've seen bass players, the bass player that ended up joining Metallica after their bass player left, they got Rob Trujillo, and in the documentary of them auditioning different guys, they would go to play one of their really fast songs, and they say to him, can you use a pick? Have you got a pick to use for this song? And he just looks at them and he goes, I got 4 of them right here. And he's got that. But yeah, that guy, man, Matteo Mancuso. If anyone can put me in touch with him, I'd love to have him on the show. That was mind-blowing. It was like the fastest alternate picking you've ever heard, but with no pick, you know?
Yes. But, and there's so many of those guys now that you come across on YouTube with various different techniques.
Mm-hmm.
All this, you know, it's way above my head. So I have to stick to my old school stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
obviously you've seen people come along that have raised the bar as you've been going along. And I think you told me one time about seeing Clapton for the first time. You guys all went to see Cream. Am I thinking of the right person? Was it Clapton or was it Hendrix?
It was Clapton.
Yeah.
I did see Hendrix at the Hollywood Bowl too.
Yeah.
And that was great.
Yeah.
But when Cream first came over and played the Santa Monica Civic, Richard Perry took us to see them. I'd never even heard of them because their record had just come out. And, it was, you know, he was one of the first guys that really fused blues and rock, or whatever you want to call it, in such a nice way. But especially on their Cream records, I like the stuff he did as Cream. I didn't feel like, even though he was commercially successful later on as a solo artist, to me it didn't have the same. It didn't grab me as much as the Cream stuff did with that group.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's a great player, you know.
Yep.
It's just there was no White Room and that Sunshine of Your Love and those kind of songs that featured so much great guitar, you know.
Mm-hmm. We do have a question here from Jose, who drops into a lot of my live streams. Hi, Jose. Question for Mr. Shelton. Who was the best producer you worked for in Hollywood during your session days? And did you play along with Tommy Tedesco and Glenn Campbell?
Well, I did play a lot with Tommy, on sessions.
Yeah.
As far as the best producer, that's a good one. I tell you, Bill Schnee was an engineer, and he ended up producing Boz Scaggs and a lot of other great artists. But as far as an engineering producer, he was one of the best that I ever worked with, because he worked on so many sessions before he was a producer. For all the stuff I did with Richard Perry and people like that. And so if you judge him on there's my watch. If you judge them on their engineering chops, I would say that it was Bill Schnee. But Richard Perry didn't do engineering at all, but he was great at getting people to do specific jobs. Like, he got the right musicians, he got the right arranger, the right engineer, the right studio, and that approach to producing really worked out well for him.
Uh-huh.
So another one was Roy Halley, that did all the Simon and Garfunkel stuff. Because he would come up with ideas of putting a speaker over into the lift well and getting that kind of reverb and doing and pulling the best performance. Well, not pulling the best performance, but allowing them to have the best performance by just having things set up to where all they had to do was perform. And the thing with these guys like Roy Halley and Elliot Shiner, that did a lot of the Steely Dan stuff, he mixed my Art Garfunkel album. They would never play the stuff on the studio monitors. They carried these little Radio Shack speakers and they'd set that up, and
Cool.
that's the only thing they would play it on.
Yep.
Roy had what was those little boxes that we used to have?
Oratones?
Oratones.
Yep.
He liked oratones.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, now, once you get big speakers going, you don't know what you have when you leave there. So that was one of their things. Most of them shared that.
Funny you should say that, because I know you've got the NS10s in your room, and I'm an NS10 kind of guy with a sub. But a lot of my mixing I've got these tiny little speakers on each side of my iMac here from Altec Lensing, and I actually read somewhere that's what Bob Clearmountain uses for the majority of his mixing. And when I saw them, and I read that they were the old ones that came with G3 computers, the old Mac.
Yeah.
I saw those in a computer store one day, up mounted in the corners, and I said to them, "This is going to sound really stupid, but would you sell me those speakers?" And they gave it to me for $10. And that's where a lot of my important mix decisions are being made, is right there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I know some of my best mixes were on Oratones.
Yep. Yep.
But I've been on the NS10s for 30 years, I guess. Yeah.
I guess once you know them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a case of, I get a lot of people ask me, what speakers should I buy? Pick something and stick to it. And the reason I've stuck to NS10s all these years is I worked at CFM and Gold FM as a producer. I'd record voiceover all day, and I'd wake up the next day and hear my work from the day before on the radio and go, "Oh, that didn't work. Okay, won't try that again." And then sometimes you'd stumble on something and go, "Oh, okay, that sounds good on air," and remember how that sounded on an NS10. So I guess it's all about learning a speaker, isn't it? Yeah.
I want to say hello to Jose anyway, because I think that's my bass player friend, isn't it? Jose?
Let me see. If I scroll through, if you're there, mate, are you Jose Benito Martinez Jr.? Does that ring a bell?
Oh, I don't know about that last part. I only know Jose.
Okay. There's probably a few of those. We've just had a super chat come in. Arkansas has been the birthplace of so many amazing guitarists and artists. Glenn Campbell, Louie Shelton, Johnny Cash, Ronnie Hawkins, Levon Helm. Was this coincidence, or was there something special about Arkansas? Was that a scene thing? Do you think you guys all learnt from each other? Or?
Well, no, but there was something about that part of the country where we all shared the benefit of being able to listen to great music, because so many of the great artists came out of that part of the country. So I'm sure it was just the fact that we were all listening to the same kind of stuff, and such a wide range of stuff. Levon Helm, from the band, was from Arkansas. And I ran onto Levon and the band up in Toronto before they were known as the band. They were playing in a club up there. And I was up there playing with Joe and Eddie. And we'd go into this after hours club and listen to Levon and those guys play. But yeah, you had Arkansas, and then you got Shreveport, Louisiana, you got Nashville next door, Alabama. There's just so many great musicians and records that came out of that part of the country. And that's probably the connection for all of us. Okay.
Yeah. I must apologize to the people in the chat if I miss it. It's very hard to listen intently to Louie and give him my full attention and actually look over there. So those super chats do actually pop up on my screen. I can see those very easily. And there was a question there that I just come across. Apologies if this has been covered, but when you're recording at your studio, Louie, do you engineer, produce, and mix the recordings? And I know the answer to this. Would you like to answer that?
Oh, yeah, I do it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do all of it.
Do you ever hand it over? Do you have important projects that come through and you go, well, this is a job for so-and-so mixer? And if so, who's your preferred mixer if you've got to hand it over?
I haven't done that in so long. I've been doing everything myself for so long. If I go down to Melbourne and I'm going to do a band, if I'm doing like a full band, I prefer to have an engineer, because I'm more concerned with the music than whether a mic is in the right place or something like that.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing a full band, I prefer having a recording engineer. Yeah.
Cool. I personally wanted to ask you a little bit about, and I felt a bit awkward asking you to sign this the other day because my friend brought it over and said, "Oh, man, can you get this signed for me?" And I don't like doing that with my friends, but he brought over this, which you kindly signed for me, which is Lionel Richie's "Hello."
Yeah.
And man, like, that was a very huge song when I was in primary school, and I never heard over the years who it was that actually played on that, but that always stood out to me. It's like, man, I wonder who that was. And then years later to find out that it was you and that you lived on the Gold Coast here. What can you tell us about that song and that solo?
I was disappointed when I left because I thought, oh, gee, he only had me play on a ballad. And but then a few weeks later, I ran onto the keyboard player at the NAMM show, who had been there when I did that solo. He said, "Man, I heard that song on the radio." He said, "That's going to be a hit." I said, "That ballad?" He said, "Yeah." And it turned out it's been one of his biggest ever, singles.
Yep.
But they had 3 or 4 other guitar players do that solo before me, because I was actually in Australia producing a band down in Melbourne.
Okay.
And when I got back to LA, they said, Lionel's trying to get in touch with you. He wants you to do a solo, because now his producer used to be one of the arrangers for the Motown sessions I did. And he said to tell Lionel, he says, I know who could do that solo if we could just find him,
Yeah.
So that's how that all came about. I went over and did that solo.
Yeah.
And turned out to be a good one.
So one thing about that solo is the beautiful little octave phrase through there. And just watching you play, I've sometimes seen you doing your octaves as, I guess the best way of describing it is as a C shape. If you were to play a C shape chord and you've got the root notes within that chord, I've seen you slide things around that way. That's not something I've ever seen anybody else do, because they usually do the 2 fret apart thing.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, I guess, just one quirky little thing I do. Because most of the time I do play the octaves like Wes Montgomery did with that shape.
Okay. Is that what he did, huh?
Oh yeah, that's the way that was his shape for the octaves. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Cool.
And but yeah, I definitely he was one of my favorite players, and I owe part of that solo to Wes Montgomery, because that was definitely his thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're just talking about the Lionel Richie song. I was listening through some stuff. I think I've got a record over there, and Deep River Woman came on the song. And is that you playing at the start of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
Oh, because that's
I
a
played
beautiful.
on that
that's
record.
a beautiful sound, man. And just the chorus that you were using, and I've looked through just your little pedal collection there, and I see you've got the classic Arion chorus, the little plastic one, which I also have here. There's 2 models. Yours is the slightly different one. Do you remember what you would have used for chorusing and stuff? Now, this leads on to, I did see another question scan past, and you actually just talked about that you use the same amp for everything. But in terms of pedals to a session, was there certain go-tos that you'd take along to sessions?
Well, in the very beginning, we didn't have pedals. So they just sort of came in one at a time. First you had an overdrive, then maybe a chorus, then compressor. But they were always just the most basic Boss, Roland boxes, which was the first ones that came out.
Yep.
Just the most basic stuff. Like when I did the solo on Lowdown, I only had one pedal with a battery in it, and my guitar was plugged into that, and out of that into the amp. Mm-hmm. So when I'm playing the clean rhythm sound throughout the song, I didn't have the pedal on. Then when it got to the solo, I just clicked on that little cheap $40 whatever it was. I don't even remember what it was. Yep. Same with ABC on the Jackson 5. I was played straight into some kind of a Roland fuzz box into a direct box. It never even went to an amp. It was just straight into a direct box. So very, very, very low technology there. Yeah, you know.
Louie, we've still got quite a few people watching us live right now. I can hear that you're getting a bit dry. Do you want to go grab yourself a glass of water or something, mate, and come back? Because I actually, you're good.
I'm okay.
Because I actually need to have a bio break. I only just learnt that term recently. That's what So if anybody has a question that you'd like to ask Louie, and I will let him answer that while I have a bio break.
Okay.
First person to shoot a super chat, Louie will answer while I go take a break. So I'll just wait for something, or it doesn't have to be a super chat. It can just be a normal chat if somebody has any questions. Jan is actually in the house there. He dropped a really nice comment earlier. Let me scan back and find that. Where was it? Special thanks to my pal Louie, who dumped his studio on me when he left for Australia. And thanks for the addiction, Louie, and introducing me to that Rick fellow. I don't know who he's talking about. It might be me. So it's nice to see Jan there. Mate, you're making some great guitars, Jan. Loving it, mate. Loving it. As Louie said earlier, he plays that all the time. Mine is just always within reach, and that's what I use now for around home. I'm going to talk to you about some design ideas I have myself for Mark II. But let me see. Did Louie ever play on a Burt Bacharach session?
I don't believe I did. No, I didn't. I would know if I did. But
nothing springs to mind yet.
Interesting thing about Burt Bacharach is we did our mastering at A&M with Bernie Grunman. He had a little room at A&M, and in those days they had the cutting lathe for where they would actually cut you a record there of your album for you to take home and listen to make sure you like the EQ and the level and all of that sort of stuff. Most people, you might take one home or two and bring it back and say a little bit of this there. Bernie said that Burt took 80 records, 80 trips home with an acetate sample, and would come back and make that many changes. And he was so ridiculous with his perfection that he said that he just hated to see him walk in the door. Because he knew it was a nightmare.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a quick question, and then I'm going to just whiz off for a second. We were watching a little Partridge Family special recently together, and you actually played all the parts of Keith Partridge on the guitar, didn't you? That wasn't really Sean Cassidy playing. That was you. And I don't think he was too happy about that, because he actually played guitar and was told, no, Louie's going to do it.
Oh, you mean David Cassidy?
David Cassidy, sorry. I'll let you answer that, and I'll be back in a second, mate.
Okay, buddy. Yeah, the Partridge Family was mainly David Cassidy when it came to the studio recording. And David was quite into the whole recording thing. As a matter of fact, I had a guitar that I'd had custom carved. Beautiful guy up in Laurel Canyon carved this beautiful. I had a Gibson SG, and it had a water fountain and a deer and an Indian and all of this fancy stuff. And every day when I would come in to do a session, David would say, "Man, I love that guitar. Why don't you sell it to me?" I said, "Well, no, man, it's got my name on it, And so finally he caught me at a weak moment, and I said, "Okay." And I sold it to him for just a few $100s. And so then David went off. He became the superstar. I moved to Australia. We were separated for 30 years. And I moved back to Nashville, and I get a call one day saying that, could you come out to LA? We're gonna film David Cassidy doing the Partridge Family thing, and like it used to. We're doing an MTV special, and we want the same musicians. And I said, okay. So we go out, and it's me and Hal Blaine and the same old group of guys, and David's there, and we're recording this MTV thing. And David says, "Man, I still got that guitar of yours." He says, "If you want it, here's my number. Just give me a call, And I said, "Oh, fantastic." I put it in my wallet. And then I forgot about it. I got back home and I forgot about it. And one day I pull up my email, and there's this guy that says, "I just bought this guitar at an auction from David Cassidy. And could you give me a little bit of history about it?" And my heart just fell to the ground, because I knew if he brought it to some auction, he probably paid a ridiculous price for it, and I would never be able to get that guitar again. and in those days, I had an email program that, after so many emails, it would just all of them would just disappear, and that email disappeared, and I never got back in touch with that guy. But that was my David Cassidy story while you were gone.
Well, thank you for covering, mate. There was a question there from my friend Big Fella Link asking about John Lennon. Mate, I'm assuming you must have just dropped in recently, because he did cover a bit about playing with John. It's a great story there. There was another super chat that came through from Jose. Thank you, Jose. That's great, mate. And he says, "Mr. Shelton, best recording studio to work in Hollywood? Radio recorders, RCA studios. Have you got an opinion on that? Where was the best place you worked at?"
I like the Sound Factory. I didn't like the big studios as much. The Sound Factory, that's where we did the Motown stuff and Summer Breeze. It was a small studio, more intimate, and I just prefer those kind of studios. I loved A&M. That was just a great facility. They had Studio B, where so many hits were recorded in that room. Carole King. I did my first England and John Ford Coley albums there, and but it was a wonderful facility owned by Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss. That was just a great company. But those, I would say those were my two favorite studios until we built our own studio. Then that was my favorite, because we had everything just like we wanted it, Yep. It's ideal. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So somebody is saying, play something, anything. I'm not sure if you're in the mode to play anything or actually set up. Oh, your computer would pick it up. But they're also asking, where is the 52 telly? And I'm just going to say, you're probably referring to the video that we did a year or so ago. And that was, I'm assuming they're talking about the genuine 52 that I had that day. And that was lent to me very graciously by someone who didn't want to be named. He doesn't want people to know that he's got it. And I just had that for a day or two, and I thought, I got to get Louie around while we've got that. So
yeah, I'm not set up to play anything.
Yeah. I didn't think your amps or anything was set up. If you want to hear Louie play, it's all over the internet. Now you mentioned Seals and Crofts, and you produced quite a few hit albums for them, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and Summer Breeze being a very huge song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did you write that song? Did they write that song? Did you just come up with the guitar lines to it?
No, they wrote everything themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jimmy was the main writer. But we were in a band together uh, uh, before they were Seals and Crofts. And it was that band that actually the two of them were in the Champs and that did Tequila and all that. They did that for many years. And when that fell apart, they put together a little four-piece band in L.A. for a while, and their guitar player left, and I joined, and then we played the clubs in L.A., and then we went to Vegas and played Vegas. Then at some point, I got into the session scene with the Monkees, and Seals and Crofts got together as this duo and started writing these great songs. And then they had a bass player, Bobby Leidig, that joined them. And they were playing all of these great little clubs around LA and really got a great following and eventually got their record deal. Meantime, maybe over the course of a year or two, I had started producing. They had done a couple of albums with other producers, and at some point, their manager came to me and asked me about producing them, and then I became their producer and did the rest of their albums up until they finished their career.
Now, Louie, you posted something recently on Facebook, and it was a song by your son's band from a few years back. And I remember listening to it and then thinking, I've heard this song on the radio before. It was more of maybe an alternative, I guess you'd call it, hit, or just a really rockin' kind of song.
Yeah.
Are your children musical as well? Did that carry on, or is it just the one son that picked up on it?
No, he was the only one that was in music, and he was very good. He had a great band in Sydney called Blue Tongue. They got a record deal at Festival Records, and I got him a publishing deal in Nashville. He was the front man and singer and one of the main writers in the band. But he decided he'd rather be a businessman, so he got into real estate, and he got out of the music thing altogether.
Okay.
It was too unstable for him.
Yeah.
And at that point, the music business in general was somehow more unstable than it used to be in the old days. And he's a family man and didn't want that lifestyle. So, but he was very talented. I think he could have made it. I think they were one of the best bands that were going at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, just talking about producing Australian artists after you moved here, actually, I didn't recognize the name at the time, but I was a very big Southern Sons fan, and I do believe you produced their second album, which I went back and re-listened to, and the production on that is great, and some really good songs. I'm just trying to think who else. Noiseworks, you had a hand with in Noiseworks. What other artists am I thinking that you've worked with Australian-wise? Anything spring to mind?
Well, I did Peter Couples' album. I've worked with Peter a lot, Peter Couples. There was a Sydney band, Mother Hubbard, that I produced.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which was Alex Lloyd's band.
Yeah. Now I'm doing a bunch of stuff for Australian tourism and Australian health with the COVID-19 thing.
Yep.
I'm doing a bunch of productions for them now.
Yep.
For when this whole coronavirus thing, gets over with. They're putting together some tourism commercials and stuff. So we're working on that. And I'm working on a new album for myself.
Cool.
It seems like I go from one to the other, There's always a new album in the works.
Yeah.
And And I'm producing some other new artists as well. Yeah,
Cool.
but
Cool.
we're not talking about that yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to go back to Southern Sons, I do remember you saying to me that that Jack Jones / Erwin Thomas. Again, Jack, if you're watching, man, I'd really love to have you on here. I did email him a couple of times, but I haven't heard back.
Well, that was a great band. Jack's a great guitar player.
He was one of my biggest influences, man. One of my biggest influences at a very influential age.
Virgil Donardi was the drummer.
Yeah.
Killer drummer.
Absolutely. Now, I do remember you saying that Jack was the kind of guy that would rent 10 Marshall Plexi heads, play through the roll and find the right one.
Yeah.
So have you worked with many guys that are really that pedantic about their tones?
Well, I have worked with a lot of guys that want to crank those Marshalls up, on number 11, and I don't enjoy that personally.
Yep.
I have to leave the room.
Yep.
But they're hearing something there that when they get it right, they know it's right. But I just let them do that till they're happy with it.
Sure.
And
so
I'll push a record button.
Yep. I understand that volume of being around that, but having said that, it's very popular now to use a load box and speaker impulse responses to recreate the cabinet. When I was talking to Steve Stevens earlier today, he logged in about half an hour earlier, and I had a good old chat with him, and we were just talking about his use of speaker IRs now, and that he doesn't mic his cabinets live anymore because it just sounds so good to use impulse responses. I had Bob Spencer from Rose Tattoo, The Angels, etc. And when he gave me his album to listen to, I was just gobsmacked at how good the guitar sound was. And he said that was all impulse responses as well. So what I'm getting at is by using load boxes, that thing that those guys were going for by cranking that Marshall to 10 is achievable now in apartment room living. And there is that difference. I can feel it where the amp starts to compress in a certain way and everything. So yeah, it's not just a wanky thing that some people are like, oh, it has to be this loud. There is a certain life, and I'm just trying to think of the term for it.
I just want to say, I've been listening to Paul Rose a lot for any guitar players out there that want to hear a great guitar player. He's in England, and he's using AmpliTube. So he's kind of put me onto that. So we're going to be exploring that. I think if I do go away from the amp at all, I think that's something that I'd be able to use because he gets a great sound out of it. It sounds very natural and very versatile.
Yeah. He was a great player. You texted me last Saturday night or something to say he's live streaming now, and I was actually at a friend's place, and she straight away put it on her big screen TV, and it was very creative what he was doing using the program Ableton Live as a looper, and then putting things down and playing. He wasn't trying to play fast. He just had that feel, very much Dave Gilmour style or something. Just talking about amps, mate. Somebody mentioned to me a while back, and I wasn't sure if it was true or not, and I think I did ask you about it one time, about adding a master volume to your Princeton. Did you get that modified?
Oh, yeah. I had the whole Paul Revere mod put onto my Princeton. I lost the reverb knob because he put a master volume on it, and you can. It's got so many different things where you can pull the knobs out. My son-in-law Corey Fite was a great technician, and he was working at Valley Arts at the time when they were over in North Hollywood there. Over in the Valley.
Yep.
And he did that mod for me on my little Princeton. That gave me the master volume where I could crank up the preamp and get, some dirt going.
Yep.
but at a level that we could work with in a live recording situation.
Yeah.
And that was before we had master volumes.
Yep.
It was unbelievable. And that's the way I like to use it.
Yep.
Yeah, I can just dial in the exact amount of dirt that I want and still not having it, blow my ears, with such volume.
Yep.
So
yeah. That thing I was talking about with using a load box and speaker impulse responses, that's exactly the same thing. It's like having a master volume on your output tubes. Not a master volume. How do I say it? Being able to, you just said about your preamp, being able to turn the preamp up and then turn it down at the output. Well, imagine being able to get those output tubes pumping as well, but at a whisper quiet volume. That's the beauty of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I have one of those on the shelf too over there. That if I use a bigger amp, I use that one.
Yeah, cool.
But I rarely have a need for anything other than my Princeton.
Yep. Yep.
And I have a Blues Junior that's very similar.
Yep.
It's got the master volume as well.
Cool.
My little Princeton still has the 8-inch speaker in it, and of course the Blues Junior has a bigger one. So if I go to a small club or something, I'll just take the Blues Junior.
Yep.
If I'm playing in a bigger band, I'll take the Hot Rod Deluxe or something like that, Mesa Boogie. Yeah.
There's something to be said about a smaller speaker, isn't there? When I was talking to Bob Spencer the other day, he said, particularly with the Angels, he was recording with an 8-inch speaker. Just over my shoulder there somewhere, I've got a little Vox AC10 and mic'd up. It just sits in a track perfectly. I don't have to EQ it. It's just right. But with the bigger speakers, you're having to pull out a lot of things that don't need to be there. So you must have clued onto that fairly early then, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I talked to Larry Carlton years ago when he was first doing a lot of his solo records. And he said he would go through this thing of trying so many different amps, and he'd a lot of times end back up with just the little Princeton.
Yep. Yep.
So anyway, I have a singer coming in a little while.
Yep, we better round things up. Folks, if you have any questions, you better quickly ask them before we lose Louie to his studio, as does happen. So I'm just going to keep talking because there is a slight delay in case somebody has any questions that they really want to throw at us before we round it up. But Louie, I really want to thank you, mate. We've been talking about doing this for a while, and I think you can see it's not that scary, is it?
No.
Yeah. No, okay, so I don't have any more there. Louie, thank you so much for your time, mate.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, I'll be in touch very shortly. Thank you to everybody that tuned in, and I'm going to hit the end screen button now, and you're going to see my beautiful logo. Please like, subscribe. My channel is very small at the moment, but I've got some absolute ripper guests coming, and those little subscribes go a long way in helping me keep this going. With the current situation, I'm dangerously close to having to move out of where I am, which would be absolutely disastrous for my channel. And the one thing that can save me is more subscriptions. So please like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. It goes a long way. Again, Louie, thank you so much, mate. I will see you all again shortly. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.